What's going on, folks? Ted from Immersion here, and I wanted to do another Unearthed Arcana revisit with you. This time, the Modifying Classes Unearthed Arcana from way back in April of 2015. This is written by Rodney Thompson, who's no longer with the company. He was moved on pretty early on, but was there at the launch of 5e. And it talks all about modifying existing classes, what things you need to consider as you're looking at them to adjust. Even gives you a spell-less version of a ranger, which again, they realized even back in 2015 that a ranger might need help in some aspect. And it also has the precursor, the initial precursor of what eventually became the Divine Soul Sorcerer, but I think there's room to make this its kind of standalone own thing. But before we talk about that, let's talk about the sponsor for today's video, our returning friends at Describe. Describe is an online tool that you can use to pull from a bunch of different box text to use in your own games to add immersion and other things and take that load of descriptive text off of you and have a team of writers put it together for you. As you can see, they have collections that currently cover places, monsters, spells, characters. Here's some of the images from the cartographer where you can tooltip click on different things and use it as you see fit. They're currently working to bring items, planes, and dialogue in, and we currently have over 2,900 scenes, some updated as soon as this morning. As you can see, they started adding magic items, right? Amulet of Health there. We're going to be talking about the Ranger, so I thought we could read this one. The elf moves quickly through the underbrush, passing silently. Their nimble steps disturb neither animal nor plant as they scale the tree and bring back their longbow to bear. With practiced precision, they slide free an arrow and nock it, drawing it back on the bow and loosing the projectile in one fluid motion. So again, thank you Describe for sponsoring this video. There's a link in the description where you can use the coupon code NERDIMMERSION to get 10% off of your first purchase there, and you have a bunch of different options, whether you want to do monthly, annually, and then different tiers and versions, whether you want everything or just specific things. So here is our Modifying Classes Unearthed Arcana. This is back in the day when they used to actually put the entire Unearthed Arcana here and then also have it replicated again in the PDF. So I'll put a link to that in the description. But basically, they're talking about if you want to create new class options, what do you need to consider? So it says, each class consists of at least one major decision point. Clerics choose Divine Domain, fighters choose a martial archetype, rogues choose a roguish archetype, and so on. The first thing to do when creating a new class option is figure out what the option's unique aspect is, both in terms of the class's underlying story and the options placed in the campaign world. We're going to get to that in a second here. Once you have a unique concept for your class in mind, it's time to get down to the design process. Take a look at a class's existing options and see what they provide, and then what would you do differently. It's perfectly fine for two class options in the same class to share some mechanics. We see that with Channel Divinity being shared and multiple options for the cleric. At every step along the way, you can compare what you're designing with the original concept, and if the design is helping to define and establish the concept, you know you're on the right path. As you consider which class features to include in your new class option, address the following. What kind of abilities do other options for this class provide at comparable levels? Do features improve a character's combat ability directly, make the character better at exploration or interaction, or provide alternatives that aren't about pure increase in power? How do the features at a given level reinforce the story of that class option? And does an existing mechanic already accomplish something that the new class option also needs to do? And they say here are some class-specific guidelines. So let's look at Barbarian, for example. It says Barbarian's Rage class feature grants a significant increase in defensive strength. Be aware of how other class features interact with Rage to boost the character's offensive potency. For example, the primary drawback of Reckless Attack is largely offset by the damage resistance provided by Rage, and the Berserker's Frenzy feature gives the Barbarian a lot of attack power for at least one combat. Note that the fast movement serves three important purposes: getting the Barbarian to the front line of the battle quickly, preventing the Barbarian's rage from ending because an enemy is not nearby, and encourage the Barbarian to stay out of heavy armor. The 10th level feature of both Primal Paths, remember there's only the player's handbook at this point, speaks more to the interaction pillar of the game rather than combat, but be wary of replacing or altering them to add combat potency. And the 6th level benefit of the Path of the Totem Warrior generally speaks to the exploration pillar, so think twice before changing it for some of the reasons above. So let's go ahead and read what they said for Ranger. Rangers have a spellcasting progression that is half as vigorous as normal progression. Spellcasting feature can be tinkered with a bit, but it still needs to be a significant portion of what the classes can do. It's the same for what they wrote for Paladin. Much of the Ranger's extra potency in combat comes from spells such as Hunter's Mark, and from the class features granted by the Ranger archetypes. The 3rd level feature in each archetype usually either provides a raw increase in combat power or grants the Ranger greater combat versatility. So flat out the gate, you're telling me that Hunter's Mark is something that helps, like, at that point, why is Hunter's Mark not a class feature if it's something you're telling me that they're balancing around Hunter's Mark? Favorite enemy was intentionally designed to provide no combat bonus because the ranger's strength in combat should rely solely on the discretion of the dungeon master or the circumstances of the adventure. Although the hunter archetype's third level ability does rely on the nature of the foes being fought, favorite enemy is generally useful in the interaction and exploration pillars of the game. Let's see how that compares to Paladin. Paladins derive a large amount of their combat potency from Divine Smite, since the Paladin can wait until after determining if an attack hits or is a critical hit to use the Smite. The character is capable of intense bursts of damage. Be wary of tinkering with this feature because it's fundamental to the Paladin's combat strength. Yeah, I think that's a lot better than saying a spell that they might take or might not take. It's a fundamental class feature. Many of the Paladin's class features are defensive in nature, protecting both the Paladin and his or her allies from harm. That's great, compared to the Ranger's favorite enemy, which is really not intended to have any combat benefit, but the Paladins are all defensive to help them. It's just, you can see the disparity there. All right, moving on. Example, Ranger with no spells. So, for all of you who've ever wanted to play Aragorn, this is the option for you if you really want to stick to the fact that he's a ranger and not a fighter. I still say he's a fighter, but we can fight that and have fought that on D&D forums for decades at this point. Let's say in your campaign you want rangers to be a little more like Strider from Lord of the Rings and less overtly magical. Well, here we go. Spellcasting class feature has a big impact on the ranger class, so this is no small project. Start by evaluating what the spellcasting feature is contributing to the class. In general, rangers have limited spells, operate on the same progression as a paladin, but you have to consider what they have access to. They have detect poison and disease, beast sense, and conjure animals. They gain a lot of their combat potency from spells, especially Hunter's Mark. They have some healing and cure wounds, lesser restoration, and so on. Rangers get some combat control things like ensnaring, strike, spike growth, and conjure barrage. At some levels at which a ranger gains access to new spells, this is the only class feature they get. Given the usefulness of the Cure Wounds spell and the greater need for healing at low levels, let's create a healing feature for the ranger that allows them to apply herbal poultices, an improvement that is on par with drinking a potion at first, but then scales up. Additionally, since the ranger is likely to need some extra combat utility that spells would normally provide, let's add a version of the combat superiority class feature from the Battlemaster Fighter. Okay, I'm on board so far. We'll just basically talks through that. At 9th and 13th level, there are gaps where there could place some exploration-focused mechanics. Let's model the first one after protection from poison and the second one after conjure animals. At 17th is another gap with an improvement on combat superiority. Fortunately, the Battlemaster has a feature for that. Finally, we need to consider the impact of these changes on the other class features and make adjustments as necessary. For example, the Beastmaster archetype for the Ranger has a share spells feature, which we wouldn't have if we don't have spells. So here we go, Spellless Ranger. At second level, you learn maneuvers that are fueled by special dice called superiority dice. It's basically exactly like the fighter. So the base, which is interesting that one of their fixes to make the non-spelled Ranger is to basically make it a Battlemaster fighter, but all Rangers would have the Battlemaster maneuvers, not just like the fighter archetype. This would be all Rangers, regardless of what kind you were. Okay, so it basically functions the same way. You get another die at 9 and 17, you add additional maneuvers, and so on. Then you get poultices at 3rd level. You can spend 1 hour gathering herbs and preparing herbal poultices using treated bandages to create a number of poultices equal to your wisdom modifier. You can carry a number of poultices at one time equal to your wisdom modifier. The poultices you create cannot be applied by anyone but you. After 24 hours, they lose their potency. If you spend 1 minute applying one of your poultices to a wounded humanoid, expending it, they gain a d6 hit points for every 2 ranger levels you have, rounded up. So that'll eventually scale all the way up to 10d6, but it does take a minute to apply, so it's kind of an out-of-combat healing. They have natural anti-venom. You have advantage on saving throws against poison and resistance to poison damage. Additionally, you can use your poultices to cure 1 poison effect on a creature, in addition to restoring the hit points. Pretty solid. Call natural allies. You can call natural creatures from the terrain to fight on your behalf. The DM chooses beasts appropriate to the terrain to come to your aid. And then it tells you can choose from the following lists of these to think, basically replicating the conjure animal spell. These beasts approach you from their current location, will fight alongside you. After an hour, they return to their previous location. 17, you get relentless. When you roll initiative and have no superiority, you get one. And as a replacement to share spells, you can consider Beastly Coordination. When an attacker that you can see hits your beast companion with an attack, you can call out a warning. If it can hear you, it can use its reaction to have the attack's damage, basically giving it uncanny dodge. It's remarkable, and I'm sure I probably did this on purpose, but my personal ranger fix for a lot of this seems similar in a lot of ways to this, so maybe this inspired me subconsciously. And then lastly, we have the Favored Soul, which they even reference Complete Divine, which was a book in 3.5 where they added basically a spontaneous, or a spells known version, spontaneous caster, charisma-based, tied basically to the cleric, and that was the Favored Soul. And then they said they're trying to basically, how can we do this? And I think this was originally the Favored Soul, and then it became, there was like a Favored Soul revised, and we eventually landed on the Divine Soul that we have in Xanathar's Guide. I still think there's a version to do of the Favored Soul that we could go back and make. And if there's interest, let me know, because I started working on one years ago before the Divine Soul eventually came out. So let me know what your thoughts are. If you want to see it, I'll make it, and I'll make a video on it at some point. So Chosen of the Gods, you add Chosen Cleric's Divine Domain. You add the domain spells for you add that domain spells for first level clerics to your spells known. They don't count against the number you know and are considered sorcerer spells. When you reach additional levels, you likewise learn your domain spells that become available at those levels, basically giving you something remarkably close to what we see on the two new sorcerers who just get 2 spells each level automatically known. They're telling you pick a cleric domain and you get those, which is funny because that's how I decided in my Fixing Sorcerer 3.0 how you could fix the Divine Soul. Then you also got proficiency in light armor, medium armor, shields, and simple weapons. This was something that they got originally. They were kind of like a cleric-esque, but they used charisma. So that kind of made sense, the original Favored Soul. And I still kind of like that. I would probably keep that as it is. Then at 6th level, they got extra attack for 2 attacks. 14th level, they got Divine Wings, feathered or bat-like, your choice. And then you could have your fly speed. You can't manifest your wings while wearing armor. I would just remove that. And then Power of the Chosen at 18th level. When you cast one of the spells chosen from your level 1 feature, you regain hit points equal to your charisma modifier plus the spell's level. In the end, the capabilities of our Favored Soul Sorcerer are quite close to that of the spontaneous casting Favored Soul class from long ago. And that's where they landed. And I think it was close, but I don't think it quite hit the mark. But I think there's definitely some work that could be done there. And I liked the idea of making essentially a Favored Soul a sorcerer that got access to armor, which is something we haven't really seen. We've seen, like, Warlock, for example, get access to other armor types via Hexblade. We've seen Wizards get access to armor via the Blade Singer, so I think it'd be cool to make a version of that for the Favored Soul and make an updated version. The Divine Soul can live where it does, but I think the Favored Soul could be an additional thing that we add as well. So anyway, there you go, folks. That was sort of the Modifying Classes Unearthed Arcana. I definitely think if you're looking to do homebrew design or make something specific or change up the way a class is written, granted, this is from 2015, so it's a little bit old, and we've seen some power creep and adjustments to the way things work in the game, but some of that fundamentals are good and they make sense about the balance, right? Consider this and how this applies to these other things before you go adding and tweaking stuff. Also, the concept of a spell-less ranger was pretty cool. I remember that was in an older edition book. They made rules for a spell-less ranger. They also had in that same older edition book, was it Complete Warrior? I think, I can't remember. They made a spell-less paladin as well, but the way they have smite working and everything, I don't know if a spell-less paladin really has a place. I don't know how you would compensate for that, but I don't know. Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. Was this the first time you'd heard of this? Again, it was from 2015, so for a lot of you who only started playing in the past 3 or 4 years, you just probably wouldn't know about it. But yeah, and then that Spellless Ranger is still interesting, and I think you could definitely sample some of those things when you go and make new subclasses or even whole new classes. For example, I've been looking to try to find a way to fix the Nature Cleric, and the Nature Domain Cleric, and I think I might choose Call Natural Allies. Instead of, like, you can use your Channel Divinity to basically do that instead of, you know, charming animals or something like that. I don't know. We'll see. So, Anyway, thank you all so much for watching. Thank you once again to Describe for sponsoring this video. I will see you all next time.